All right, welcome back to another episode of Conspiracy in the Force. My name is Conspiracy Kyle. On today's episode, I have a very special guest with me. I have Mr. Ricky Varandas, host of the Ripple Effect podcast, as well as co-host of the really great Union of the Unwanted show with, Midnight Mike, Charlie Robinson, and Sam Tripoli and those guys, and really love what's going on with that show. So how's it going today, Ricky?
Good. Thanks for having me, Kyle. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who don't know you, and shame on you if you're listening and don't know who Ricky is, can you give everybody a little bit more about yourself and some of the content you work on?
Yeah. So I was kind of like a lot of typical people prior to getting into some type of content creation. Just kind of I used to be a musician, played music growing up, loved music, loved being creative and artistic and those type of things, and then got stuck right after high school, got stuck working full time and the everyday grind, and just kind of felt like something was missing. I stopped playing music because a lot of my bandmates were just getting caught up with their lives and were having a hard time keeping everybody together. And just felt like something was missing. Like I had to do something creative or something more. And I've always been really into alternative media and alternative history, alternative perspectives, alternative music. I probably started with alternative music, just really into just stuff that went against the mainstream type of genres. And got into podcasts. It just kind of worked out that I was doing a lot of commuting and then fell in love with podcasts because it was a way of making the time go by. To me, it was kind of easy to see why the popularity of it was going to grow. When I got into it in 2013, end of 2013, I felt like I was late to the game. And I know a lot of people who are getting in now feel like they're late to the game. So we always feel whenever you start, you're going to feel like you're late. But it's I just kind of felt like, I've always been one of those people that I love meeting people. I love to having conversations. I love hearing their stories. I love extracting any information, any knowledge from them. And it's just one of those things where I truly believe. Hold on, is that? Sorry, I thought that I heard my wife in the background, but I truly believe that it was one of those things where uh, everybody has some personal experiences, some wisdom, something from their journey that you can learn from and you can get something from. So that aspect of just learning from one another. Can you hear that in the background or no? Because if
No, you're good.
okay, good. It's just one of those things where I could kind of see how now I can get that from a podcast instead of having to individually meet a bunch of different people and extracting that wisdom and that information. You have podcasts, which is basically those same type of conversations. You kind of just you capture them and then you share them. And I remember when I first started with at the time I had a co-host, Dave, and I'm like, hey, we're gonna, talk and we're gonna record a conversation and we're gonna share with the world. And he's like, what are we gonna talk about? I'm like, I don't know. And I'm like, just talk about like the things we talk about when we're together. And it seemed absurd, this idea of just recording a conversation and sharing it, especially a conversation with people who are experts in no one field and really you would assume don't have much to offer. But for me, it was easy to understand that if I can have a conversation with somebody and I get, we've all been in those moments where you're out with your friends, you're having a couple of drinks, you're at the bar, you're at a restaurant, and after dinner, you're talking and you're drinking and you get into some personal discussions and you're sharing ideas and you're challenging ideas. I understood how enjoyable those conversations are in person. Why wouldn't they be enjoyable if you're recording them? So that was kind of my take on podcasts. I kind of felt like I could foresee people enjoying this the same way they enjoy having conversations and being around others. So all that commuting led to me listening and consuming podcasts and eventually thinking I have all this music equipment that I'm not using. Why not put it to some use? And I kind of understand audio and how to record it and all that stuff. There's some things about podcasting I still had to figure out. And then once I kind of figured all that stuff out, I'm like, let me just see where it goes. So and then I started recording the Ripple Effect podcast. The name came from a song of mine. I was doing like kind of a solo music project called Theory 6. And it was a combination of like electronic and metal music, the two genres I really love the most. And then just kind of started recording them and little by little started getting guests on. Some of my first guests in late 2013, early 2014 were people like James Corbett, Jason Burmis, Douglas Ruskoff, Dr. Brzezinski, Dr. Gregory A. Smith. That's the other thing. I've always really been into diet and nutrition. I've been a gym rat like most of my life, and always really fascinated with like just how the body works, how to optimize it, all those type of things. So when I got into alternative media, it was a natural, just interest of mine to get into like alternative medicine and big pharma and all the propaganda behind science and all that stuff. So yeah, so that was kind of my origin story, a kind of a long one. Probably shouldn't have been or didn't have.
Oh yeah, no problem. It's great. That's one thing I really like hearing about is like you said, a lot of us come from different backgrounds, different perspectives, all this different kind of stuff. And what you mentioned about, those conversations you'd have at the bar with your buddies, right? That's one thing that it seemed like the powers that be really wanted to suppress last year. But I think at the same time, you saw such an exponential growth in people listening to podcasts like yours and Charlie's and Sam's and everybody's, because we were banned from having those one-on-one conversations with your buddies. So they kind of failed, I think, in that aspect, because I think a lot of those conversations were still going on, but now they're going on with people that you would never meet in real life, right? Like people in different geographic locations, in different political type of situations, et cetera. So I think it's, podcasting has really opened it up. And, it's crazy. I'm sure you've seen it too with statistics for your podcast, but I'm like, crap, like people are listening to my podcast in like Colombia, like you would have never thought that like your voice would be able to have that big of a range, but it's really great when you're able to put it out there like that. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's amazing. Sometimes I tell people, I'm like, yeah, that, they're like, oh, what's your download numbers or whatever, if it's just friends of mine or family that's curious and we're talking about it. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, and I get, I'm like top 3 or in philosophy in like El Salvador and top, and they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, podcasts are international. I mean, people listen to these shows everywhere. I mean, obviously my download numbers, and like I'm sure most people who speak English, most of them are in English speaking countries. So like the majority of my download numbers will be from a combination of like England, Ireland, Canada, Australia, and the US, stuff like that. And then I have like Sweden. I have a huge following in Sweden and like a bunch of just random countries. And then I have a decent amount in a lot of other countries that I've probably would struggle to find on a map. But it's pretty cool that there's people that you're touching and connecting with all over the world. I mean, the other cool thing is when 2020 was happening, how much information I had to what was going on in other countries was awesome, because I was having listeners from the UK and all over the world tell me what was going on in their neck of the woods. Like, hey, the news is saying this, but I'm not seeing it. And it seemed like that seemed to be the case in most places. Like the news kept kind of painting this picture of chaos, but the majority of us are like, okay, where the fuck's the chaos? I don't see it. Like where's all this chaos and that, the dead bodies in the streets, like we're sold, and what justified the lockdowns and all these measures that were taking place. So yeah, without a doubt, it's awesome to connect with people all over the world. And like you said, it's so true. One of, I think, their biggest tools or most important tools in 2020 was keeping us from talking, because I've said this on my show a bunch, and again, and then I want to get to it. The other thing you said too about like the pros and cons of 2020, I do think some of the pros are that people got into podcasts, and like the union of unwanted happened because of that. But yeah, not letting us connect with one another and discuss what we're seeing, discuss what we're hearing, all that type of stuff was really essential to keeping us kind of locked in this illusion. Because the truth is, when you talk to people and you start kind of sharing ideas and kind of talking about what you're seeing and what you're hearing, it didn't take long before most of us said, yeah, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But keeping us all locked in our houses and keeping us from talking, and then the only real conversations we were seeing or witnessing were the ones on TV, which were all kind of spouting the same bullshit. So it's like, okay, that's I'm assuming that's what people believe, that's what people think. And that's why when we started the Union of the Unwanted show, some of the most common feedback we would get was like, thank God, like there's other people outspoken who are seeing what I'm seeing, because I feel like I'm going crazy. Everybody around me is completely brainwashed or drinking the Kool-Aid and convinced of this, and I think it's all bullshit, and nobody else around me thinks it's bullshit. Am I going crazy? So to see that many people come together and talk about it and share, their perspectives on what they were seeing, all over the world, I think it was reassuring. It was nice. A lot of people needed that, because there are some long-term psychological trauma coming from 2020. I mean, my kids, I'm sure, are going to deal with something, as especially, and we might not even know what it is now. Um,
Right. Yeah.
when they're adults and they're a little older, and we can kind of talk about it, or they can say, hey, like, I have this, maybe it's affected your social skills, because for so long you couldn't touch one another, and you couldn't talk. That's why people were like, oh, I had a kid in 2020, that's like the worst time to have a kid. I'm like, no, no, no. If you had a kid in 2020, you had a newborn, it was probably much better, because your first year of life, you're basically home with your parents anyways. Like, there's not a whole lot that's going on in the outside world that affects you. But people who have toddlers like I do, and young children who could actually witness what was going on, and was observing the mask wearing, the all of a sudden people were following lines in stores, and having to be separated, and weren't leaving their houses, and all this stuff. I mean, they're the ones who are going to have to deal with the trauma. They're the ones who have
Yeah.
to deal with some type of psychological issue that I think is going to come from it, because there's so many life experiences, even things that are much less significant, that has long-term lasting effects on children. It's hard to believe that this won't.
Right. Yeah. I'm with you there. I have a daughter that's 2 and a son that's 4, and I think they may have been just a bit young to get the full grasp of it, but still, they're in daycare and stuff, and they're seeing all the teachers with masks and all the same kind of stuff, in stores, like you mentioned about the lines and stuff. And I think it's more than that too. It's, the overhead speakers, like, stay apart, all this like messaging coming across everywhere you go. It's you're right. You don't really know the long-term effects of that kind of stuff. So it's really unfortunate. But I will say, like we were talking about, the pros and cons of last year is, me being home last year, working from home last year, I got to see my daughter walk for the first time. That's something that, like, a daycare teacher would have just told me, when I went to pick her up in any normal year. So I was like, it's so weird, some of the dichotomy there of how, people's lives and livelihood were destroyed in last year, and obviously, and there's all the medical nonsense and whatnot, but there was a lot of good stuff that came out of it. So, yeah, you mentioned a little bit about the Union of the Unwanted. How did that kind of get started? How did you get hooked up with Mike, Sam, and Charlie, and those guys?
Yeah, so like I said, I've been doing the show since 2013. So throughout the years, I've networked with a lot of people, met a lot of people, and I always loved kind of doing swap casts. So before the Union of the Unwanted, if you go back in my archives, you'll see a lot of shows where I'll bring 2, 3 different guests on to kind of chat, and I used to do it all the time. I did a JFK roundtable show. I did a part 1 and part 2 that was just phenomenal and awesome. I would just bring people that I liked on, and that I thought maybe could contribute to one another's ideas and stuff, and so that was always something I enjoyed doing. And then when 2020 happened, I happened to do one with it was Charlie, and it just actually, I think it happened because I honestly don't remember, and until this day, I'm not sure of how I got hooked up with Midnight Mike and the OBDM show. I think somebody hit me up and they're like, "You should be a guest on that show" or something, and or somebody asked me to be a guest. I don't know how. I don't even remember if it was a fan, if there was a middleman who got me on that show, or if it was Mike at the OBDM show who asked me to come on the show. But either way, I was asked to go on the show, and I went on the OBDM show, and I was interviewed on there, and I was just a guest. And then the next day, Charlie hits me up, and he's like, "Dude, you were just on my favorite show." And I'm like, I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "The OBDM show." He's like, "I listen to that show all the time." And I'm like, "Yeah, I was just on." And I'm like, "Mike's super cool." I'm like, "How about we all get together and you get to be on your own, you get to be a guest on your favorite show?" And he's like, "Yeah, that'd be awesome." So, and then we did that, and I'm like, oh, let me hit up some more people and see if anybody wants to join in and hang out, and we'll just have a big like, I think it was a Friday night. It was like we're like, let's do kind of like a Friday night hangout show. So it was the three of us, and I actually emailed. It's funny how things kind of sometimes fall into place. I emailed quite a few people to show up, and the only other person who showed up, it was me, Mike, Charlie, and the only other person who showed up was Sam. So shows up, and it's the four of us, so we're all chit-chatting. We're doing like a swap cast, and we're all chit-chatting, and then next thing you know, we're Mike, we're talking about censorship. That's what it was. We're talking about censorship, and we're talking about how like we're getting so many people that we know and people we're fans of are getting kicked off or censored on all these platforms. And Mike's like, yeah, we're kind of like the Union of the Unwanted. And we're like, holy fuck, like I don't know what to do with that name, that title, but hold on to that, because it's seems it's just has a ring to it that's just awesome. It's just an awesome name. So we kind of I think Mike, while we're doing the show, bought the URL and then he bought the URL on air while we were recording. He's like, I just bought the URL. I'm like, good idea. And then we were talking about censorship, and we kept talking about censorship, and then we're like, hey, let's do another one of these swap casts where we bring some people together, but let's get a bunch of us together. And then because we're all in like a group text message, and let's get a bunch of us together. Let's do a giant swap cast with a bunch of people who are being censored. And obviously this was during 2020, so it was happening to a lot of people, and it was a big issue because obviously they're suppressing the truth and stuff now that is completely acceptable to talk about, but at the time was completely just, if you even mentioned it could have came from a lab, or that the numbers were inflated, or it was a bad flu, people would lose their fucking mind. So we ended up getting all these people together. We're like, let's call the Union of the Unwanted, right? Let's do a show called the Union of the Unwanted. We'll bring all these people together. I think we had like 30 people, or maybe even more. I don't know. We had like Luke from We Are Change, we had Corbett, we had Ben Swan, we had Gordo from the conspiracy guys, and so we had so many different people on the show, and we talked about censorship. And then I'm like, I love this fucking idea. And I've, like I was saying before, I've always been attracted to swap casts and getting people together, probably because, in real life, in my personal life, I love meeting people, and so I love that aspect of it, and bringing different people together to bounce ideas off one another. So then I'm like, let's keep this going. Let's do this. Let's make it a show. Let's do it. So initially it was supposed to be just a swap cast. So I'm like, we'll all get together on like a Monday night or whatever, because I think the first big one was a Monday night. And again, this is just funny how this all works out. I think it was that Monday night because I really wanted James Corbett to join us, and typically he's free on Monday. So I'm like, let's do it Monday night, because then the likelihood of James joining us are higher. So we'll do it on a Monday night, and then we're like, let's do it every other Monday. And so we did it every other Monday. We just kept bringing in whoever. Everybody has been in the podcast world for a while. People like Sam and Charlie was interviewed on a bunch of different shows because of his books and stuff like that. So he knew a lot of people. And Midnight Mike's been doing it for a long time. So, but I really, I love networking. So initially, like, I really took the lead in regards to booking people, and I would just contact so many different people and people that I'm a fan of. And that's why most people, if not all, just about everybody, especially the first 6 months or so, everybody who was on the Union of the Unwanted were past guests of mine. So there are people I already had a connection with, already had a conversation with, and just brought so many different people on. Ben Swan was on one, Jim, and then random people like Jim Florentine, and a lot of doctors that I'm friends with, like Dr. Scott Jensen came on, and Dr. Judy Mikovich came on, and so many different people, and Zach Forey's the Google whistleblower, and Greg Palast, and the very famous journalist. And so all these different people. I got Roger Stone on one show, and Whitney Webb, and so it was really fun. We just bring people on, and but you could even see on the show. So in our personal lives, I'm sure many of us were experiencing these tensions that were kind of growing right before the election, because they were doing such a great job of getting us all emotional and turning on one another. And and you could kind of see that on the show too. And I remember I brought Greg Palast on a little bit before a little before the election, and it got a little heated because he's kind of a left leaning, I would say more of a traditional liberal type of guy, but he tries to be down the middle, and he's done some good reporting on some corruption with corporations and banking and all that stuff. So, but you could see he was being not attacked, but like people were kind of pushing back on him a little bit. And so you even saw that with the show, and then I think like the last show of 2020, we're like, we need to just get away from this topic, any of these topics. And I think we did an episode on UFOs, just hoping to do kind of a fun show that was less charged and less likely for people to kind of go at one another. But I think what the most amazing part of the show was how many people we had on and how many different people we would have on. I had Jim Florentine, somebody who's been on my show quite a bit. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's and I had him on with, I'm trying to think who, I had him on with Pete Evans, and I got them both on, who's this like famous Australian chef who was very outspoken. He's very into like natural remedies, and he has a great podcast called Evolve. And he, had them on, and Jim Florentine was talking about vaccines, and it's like all these people that you wouldn't expect to talk about certain things were talking about those things, and to have all these different people from different backgrounds that in other cases I don't think would ever run into each other's work, and then seeing all those people connect with one another and seeing all those people do each other's shows after the Union Done Wanted was just awesome. And then I had this idea of like, originally it was a swap cast, which means like everybody who came on could share it on their platform. So once it became its own show, because initially it wasn't its own show, initially it was just a swap cast that I was kind of initiating. And then once it became its own show, we're like, let's continue the whole swap cast type of idea of like, if you participate in the show, you get to share it on your platform. So everybody who joins the show, if you're on the show, you'll get a link afterwards, the audio and video link, and you get to share it on your platform. So one, it spreads it. But two, everybody feels like they're a part of the group. Everybody feels like, okay, this is my show too, which I love, because I did want it to be kind of like a community, and it became a community, which, is awesome. And we always try to bring up and coming podcasters on too. Hopefully maybe get you on one in the near future, and bring up and coming podcasters on and help them too. Cause that was the other thing too, is like every other episode or whatever we would bring, or we try for a while, we tried every episode bring somebody on who maybe had was doing great work but maybe was less known, and we could use that platform to kind of grow their podcast. And we were doing that. I mean, Truthzilla kind of became their own, they got huge and really doing awesome work, and that all came kind of from the Union of Unwanted. Same thing with like Deborah Gets Red Pilled. Adam was on and help promote that. So it's awesome to use that community to help others. So it's kind of like the Joe Rogan podcast in regards to helping people, only it's like the alternative media version of it. And in a way, I almost feel like it's much more important than JRE, because we're helping people who are doing really important work and doing it for important reasons, because they truly believe in what they're saying and what they're getting the truth out. And I know truth's subjective, it's one of those things,
right?
But I think for the most part we at least agreed on what wasn't true. And even if we disagree,
right, yeah.
I just did a swap cast with Richard Willett from Glitch in the Code, and he works at Iconic, and he does a lot of their documentaries. That's David Icke's media platform. And I love Richard, but he tends to believe that the virus doesn't exist at all. Which could be right, could be wrong. I don't know, but I know that if we take that disagreement aside, we agree on everything else. We agree on the science behind the vaccine. We agree on the numbers being inflated. We agree on all these other issues. So it's nice to kind of see people discuss disagreements in a civil way. And the Union of Unwanted, I think, was helping with that too. And I was doing it on my personal show. I mean, I didn't stray away from having people on who I knew I was going to disagree with in regards to what was going on. I mean, I had I forget his name now. He was we had a mutual friend. He was a New York author who really, fun. And in some cases, I wish I had these people on after 2020 so we could discuss things that weren't as relevant at the time. But it was, I had this New York author that we, half the show we disagreed on, what was going on and what was true and untrue. I had Scott Horton on from antiwar.com, and he's the author of the Afghanistan book. Now I forget what it's called, but he has a real famous Afghanistan book about ending the war there and all that stuff, and very outspoken libertarian. And I love Scott Horton. He's been on a bunch, and he was also on a Union of the Unwanted. But he we kind of disagreed on kind of what we were being lied to about and all that stuff. And we had a real civil, like 1 hour disagreement on what was going on. And I had so much positive feedback about, like, it's so awesome to hear two people just kind of share our perspectives and share why I believe this and why I don't believe that, and just kind of do it in a civil manner without, getting at each other. And it was nice. So, I think it is important to, like, not just create an echo chamber, and that's
Right.
always a concern too with the Union of the Unwanted was, when I had Greg Palast on, I even had Dr. Christopher Ryan. I talked him into showing up to one episode, and then he got cold feet right when it started. So there's, I forget which episode it was, but if you watch the video, he's on right when because when and I kind of did it on purpose, just to prove that this isn't some made up story, just in case anybody ever tries to deny it, that he showed up. So once the Zoom call starts, or once we start recording, we go live, and you see everybody who's on the Zoom call. Chris is there, and then 2 seconds later, he's gone. And he decided he didn't want to do it, like, at the last second. So when I edited the video and I posted it on YouTube, I'm like, let me not start the video from when he, leaves, but that 2 seconds that he's on, I'm like, I want to make sure I include that, just to, because a lot of people were accusing us of only bringing people on. Not a lot of people, but some people were accusing us of, like, only bringing people on who all had similar ideas and all this stuff. So I wanted, I'm more than open to having my ideas challenged. I mean, to me, it's like, that's how I mold my opinions and perspectives, is having them challenged, see if I can defend them. If I can't, then maybe I have to reanalyze why I feel a certain way or why I think a certain way. I learn the most talking to people who I slightly disagree with, and if I'm constantly around people who agree with me, how much am I gonna learn? So I think it's super important to be around people you disagree with. And I was hoping to bring some on, hoping I could still have that civil conversation without without anybody getting too upset. And the majority of people, I think, would disagree in a respectful manner. We have probably one or two Union of the Unwanted regulars that were on that I think would probably be a little bit, would just kind of tiptoe the line of, like, being pushed back a little too much, like, I wouldn't say disrespectful, but, like, almost like, what, like, let's try to be a little more civil when we have this discussion. But again, I also understand their perspective, because from their perspective, this was a real fight. This was a real war. This was a real battle. And it's important to fight back against anybody who was, like, if you weren't helping us, spread the truth, then you're kind of an enemy, right? And more than ever, we had so much on the line, because the way we look at the world, wearing masks, force feeding the vaccine to people, like, all this stuff were things that we're fighting for. And if anybody was kind of pushing back against any of our opinions on these things, yeah, some people would get kind of worked up a little bit. But I mean, I would get worked up a little bit, because it hit home. My kids aren't that much older than yours. My son's 6, my daughter's 4, turning 5 in August. And it broke my heart to like, pull them from school. Well, my daughter never even went to school, because she was supposed to go to a preschool, and then we just homeschooled her. And my son, same thing. He was homeschooled. To lose a year of education, to lose a year of, I mean, don't get me wrong. And we can, this is a whole nother conversation about, like, okay, the school system and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not completely. I think that they learn. My wife was always like, I don't think we're, like I'm putting too much stress on myself. I don't know if I'm doing a good job, like homeschooling. We got to get them back. And I'm like, they're learning. I'm like, you don't realize it, but they're learning. I'm like, even when you're not like super strict with like the homeschooling thing, I'm like, they're learning just by us being around them and having conversations with them and answering their questions. I'm like, personally, I'd rather them get those answers from me than a teacher who's going to give them some quick answer or give them a answer based on their perspective instead of me giving a answer based on my perspective. And so if I can have a bigger influence on their outlook, then why wouldn't that be good? Why isn't that a good thing? So, but yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of, I think a lot of parents got very motivated and got very, I think it just, it woke them up in a way that nothing else probably would have woke them up, because of the fact that it did have a personal impact on their, not just their lives but their kids' lives. And so I think a lot of people who never questioned the news that much, never questioned big pharma, never questioned the government, never questioned a lot of things, and all of a sudden had free time to go down some rabbit holes. That's why I think the pandemic documentary went viral. I had Mickey Willis on my show. I mean, it was just crazy how the lengths they went to just make sure that that video wasn't seen. and
Right.
and yet you could upload it on YouTube as long as I was narrating negative opinions about it. So it's like, as long as I was giving negative opinions about it and basically showing you the whole film, like, scene by scene, and then just pausing it so I can give you some negative opinion on it, then that was okay. So like, it wasn't too dangerous to watch. It was just too dangerous to watch on your own and come up with your own conclusion, because when so much of the world wasn't making sense, and then this documentary made sense of everything, and you watch it and you're like, holy fuck, like, you know things don't seem that confusing anymore. This makes a lot more sense than what the news is telling me. I think that's what, that's what they didn't want people to understand, that like there was these other agendas being pushed. And when you heard the truth on what was really going on, you you'd be like, holy shit, like this makes sense. This makes perfect sense. This is the only thing that kind of makes sense of all this chaos. So yeah, and this goes back to your initial point, and how do you keep us from coming to that conclusion, keep us from talking to one another and sharing information.
Right. Right. And the great thing about, like you said, your podcast, the Union of the Want to Show, it's question everything, and that's why you've probably seen a few little fighting things, because some people are so polarized to their points and their beliefs and their research, to be honest, based on everything that they've reviewed. And it's great that there is a forum where people can talk about that stuff openly, like you said, especially on your podcast, talking about people you didn't necessarily agree with. That's another thing that the powers that be don't want. They don't want people that disagree having a civil conversation. They want you to be extreme right, extreme left, extreme trust the science, extreme everything is this on this other side. They don't like people with opposing viewpoints having those civil discussions, which that's another great thing that the forum was able to provide. And honestly, even on, for anybody who hasn't heard on the most recent Union of the Wanted, you guys are even able to get Klaus Schwab's son on there, which was, hey, talk about an opposing viewpoint. I mean, you don't get any more opposing than, obviously, joking. It was a little hilarious bit. So everybody needs to go check that out.
That was, I mean, like I said on the show, his commitment to character was second to none. I mean, he would not break character at all. And I'm not too familiar with his work. I know Charlie's talked about it, and I know him and Charlie have done shows together. But it was hilarious. I mean, it was just so funny, and it was funny that Mike. Maybe I just have a better job, or I do a better job understanding broken English, because I'm being a foreigner myself and constantly being around people who are foreigners. I'm used to it. But Mike was like so lost. I remember the one time he's like, "I don't know one thing you just said," and I'm like, I was understanding what he was saying, and it was hilarious. It was so funny. So
yeah, I was a little confused at first. Then I had to go to like the description. See, like, oh, okay, it's not really. It's a bit here, but it's super funny, and it added a lot of great comedic value. And that's another thing too, is adding humor into things. I know this is one thing Charlie says all the time. It's like, add little bits of humor into stuff. It makes it not as terrifying, because if you really want to talk about all the terrible things going on in the world, you're going to drive yourself crazy and want to fit yourself in a straitjacket and never come out of a padded cell. But the point of a lot of the shows we do is to kind of laugh and almost make a parody of all this stuff, of this stuff going on. Because if you get too down the rabbit hole on a variety of topics, obviously, there's a lot of things we need to be righteously outraged about, for sure. But a lot of the stuff is just so silly, like you talked about, with the masks and people just blindly believing the TV and all that stuff. It's sometimes better to just laugh about that than to go onto the street corner and start yelling at people.
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt. I mean, a little bit. It's funny because something that I found myself just having to tell myself from time to time is, don't get so worked up in this fight about getting our freedoms back and getting our lives back. And when we say that, what we mean is, like, I just want to live my life and enjoy life to the fullest the way I was doing previously. And it's like, that's what I want. And then I get so caught up in this fight that I stop doing that, and I pause doing that. And it's like, you can find time to fight and for those things, and then still continue to do those things. And it was important. It was important for all of us to be like, okay, there's a lot we can complain about. There's a lot to be mad about, but don't forget, there's a lot we can be grateful for and we can appreciate. And, no matter how shitty things seem, it could always be worse. And, a lot of us, like yourself, who have kids, it's that's kind of one of the beautiful things about being a parent is, regardless what's going on in the rest of the world, your child can bring you joy, and none of those other things seem that significant or that important. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it is really important to still laugh and smile and enjoy life and do those things, and even mindless entertainment. I've kind of, having kids, I've kind of really got into sports again, because it's something we can watch together and experience together. I got into pro wrestling again. During 2020, there was nothing else on TV, so I'm like, fuck it, let's get the WWE app and let's watch some old shit I grew up watching. And little by little, we started watching it, and then my wife got into it, and now it's something the whole family watches together. So yeah, I mean, without a doubt, I mean, it's important to you can get just so caught up in research, information. And then it's like, okay, well, what am I fighting for? Like, why am I exposing all this? It's like, oh, so I can enjoy life and we can have the freedoms, and the just have the not have the restrictions on our lives, so we can enjoy it the way we want to enjoy it. And then you get caught up in that battle and you stop doing those things. So it is important to smile and laugh, and that's why I think some people really like people like Charlie Robinson, because he is very sarcastic. The OBDM show, same thing. Like, even Alex Jones, I mean, I think people finally start understanding that some of what he does is kind of hilarious, and it's not hilarious like accidental, like it's kind of over the top funny. It's almost easier to consume all the negative information. And OBDM does a great job with just the little samples of just every once in a while Mike will do it with the Union Unwanted episodes, and I always get mad at him, like, do more of it, it's so funny. But he doesn't want to mess up anybody's conversation or act like he's getting in the way or downplaying what somebody's saying. But I'm like, it's just so funny.
I was on there with them a few weeks ago, and he had loaded up a soundboard of all like Star Wars clips and stuff, and I almost couldn't keep my composure the whole time, because I just wanted to keep saying things that would like trigger different clips, and I'm like, no, what am I talking about here? But yeah, it's funny, and it's fun to do that kind of stuff. But you bring up a good point about family, and sometimes you go too far down the wormhole, and you kind of it's possible to kind of forget like what you're really fighting for. And big thing, everybody who's listening obviously can see all my Star Wars stuff back here, but like one big thing in Star Wars is about like what they call like the balance of the Force, right? It's balancing opposing things in a certain way where the universe works all together. So that's kind of one thing I wanted to ask you about is with with, and I know you have have a day job apart from this. You have a day job. You're married. You have kids. You do these shows on the side. How does it all work for you into a nice balance where you're able to give those things the appropriate time, and not feel like you're neglecting one or the other?
That's like probably the hardest thing to do out of everything I do. It's without a doubt the hardest thing. Like I put a lot. We were talking about this, I think, before you start recording, about the pressure we put on ourselves, and I put a lot of pressure on myself to be the best father, husband, friend, um, and then also like the importance of my own sanity and my own hobbies that I like doing that are important, with not just like for selfish reasons. Like, for example, I go to the gym, at least 4 times, 3 to 4 times a week. Typically, it's rare if I don't go at least 4 times a week. And sometimes I'm tired as all hell, and I'm like, I really maybe should get some sleep. But mentally and emotionally, I feel better when I start my day like that. And I go in the morning, I get it out of the way, and then when I butt heads with my wife or my kids or whatever, or I'm dealing with work stress, I'm in a better place to handle it. So I'm like, this doesn't just like, once you get older, like, working out's not for as much for physical health as it is for mental health. Like, I go,
Yeah, I agree.
yeah, I mean, I do it for my own sanity. I do it. It's like breathing or drinking water. I'm like, it's a necessity. And there's plenty of great studies in regards to like just the benefits of it in regards to dealing with anxiety, depression, and all that stuff. And it surpasses the benefits of antidepressants and any pharmaceutical drug. So it's,
and it kind of like, for me, it's almost kind of like a controlled raising of your blood pressure. I'm sure there's more scientific medical stuff than that, but it's like you're raising your blood pressure in a controlled manner versus, like you said, when you're having an argument with your wife or kids or stuff, you're able to regulate that more because it's already kind of hit this peak. That may not be the perfect definition, but I think same kind of thing.
well, I think we have this kind of stored energy that like just kind of grows and grows, and it's almost like, we talk about how if you don't talk about a issue, eventually it'll come out. Well, that energy is the same thing. Like, this energy will just kind of build and build, and if you don't have somewhere to kind of release it, either go for a run, or you play a sport, or you go to the gym, or you do yoga, whatever it may be, that kind of is physically stressful, or something that can help you hit the reset button. If it's doing yoga, maybe it's not so much the physical aspect of it, maybe it's the mental aspect of yoga, of the clearing your mind. And I love having a cigar from time to time, and having a glass of whiskey or wine or whatever it may be, and just kind of relaxing and being one with my thoughts. That helps. So like, having something like that is so important, because I do feel like all this negativity or friction or energy will just build and build and build. And then next thing you know, that right trigger comes at the right time, and boom, you lose your cool. And so stuff like that is really important, and I sacrifice uh some of my own health sometimes for the podcast, for my kids, for whatever. Sometimes I'm like, I'm tired, but I've been at work all day, or I've been doing a lot of podcasts. So when I have time with the kids today, I'm going to be full of energy and ready to go, and like ready to go to the park or do something that requires energy. And so I'm like, fuck it, caffeinate the shit out of myself and get through it.
Yeah.
I'll crash at the end of the day. I'm like, but I won't feel guilty about like giving my kids a half-ass energetic dad who doesn't have the energy to play with them, or maybe tries to talk them into doing something that requires less energy for my own personal reasons, like that type of stuff. And we all do that. We all, it's like, fuck, man, I don't like, hey, how about we go out to eat instead of going to the park, because grabbing food is easier than going at the park and running around with you guys, stuff like that. And it's like, I don't want to be that person. And so guilt's like my worst enemy and my best friend at the same time. It's what motivates me. Anytime I think I should do better, I really feel guilty about it. If I eat like shit for a couple days, if I am low energy, if I lose my cool, whatever it may be, or if I feel like I'm not spending enough time with my wife or my kids or all of them, yeah, I mean, I feel guilty, and my wife would always be like, don't be so hard on yourself. If you just enjoy yourself, if we're out to eat and we're talking about what we're going to eat or whatever, about having dessert or whatever. I'm like, no, I'm like, you keep talking about guilt like it's a bad thing. I'm like, and it is true, like, everything in moderation, even moderation, like, go buck wild from time to time. I don't call them cheat days anymore. I call them reward days. It's like, okay, I've been doing good all week. I'm like, if one night I'm out with the wife and we want to have some dessert and some after dinner drinks and kind of go crazy, then who cares? Enjoy yourself. And then tomorrow I'll be right back at it. But yeah, everything's a balancing act. Like my wife works late Thursdays, tonight and Fridays, and I wait for her to come home. I fast all day, so it's not super hard, but I'll wait till she gets home to eat. But the only difficult part about that is really to sleep, because if she works at a restaurant, sometimes they're out real late. We don't eat till sometimes it's 10 o'clock at night, and I'm grilling. I don't eat until after the union done wanted. So usually typically we start at 7 p.m. Eastern time. We don't end sometimes at 9:30, sometimes even 10, and then that's when I eat. And so I'll eat and I'll have a glass of wine with my wife, and we'll the kids will hang out, and we'll watch some TV. We'll find some series or movie or something that we can watch together. Typically Mondays, if the union done wanted, after the union done wanted shows, we DVR Raw, and then we end up catching up on Raw. And,
yeah, that's a good kind of palate cleanser, after all the information overload, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, you're right. It is kind of nice, because it's like once the show's done, I can stop thinking about all this negativity, and I can just focus on some like completely mindless entertainment that the kids are enjoying, and we're all enjoying together, and we can talk about and discuss and laugh together and whatnot. So it's it's really hard, but it's really easy to be lazy. It's really easy to just be like, I don't have enough energy, or I can't do this, I can't do that. It's not easy, sometimes going to the gym the next day after my wife gets home at like 11 o'clock at night, to go to the gym the next day before work at 5 or 6. And it's just like, it's difficult, but I'm like, okay, I got this. I made my wife happy because I get to spend this little bit of time with her at the end of the night. We have a glass of wine. Usually like Friday nights, we'll do like a little meat and cheese platter. So I'll have it ready when she comes home. I'll put the kids to sleep. I'll hang out with the kids all night, do something with them, put them to sleep. Then hopefully soon after they're in bed, my wife gets home, then we can hang out. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm just, I've spent some time with the kids, had some one-on-one time with them, gave them some attention. Now I had some one-on-one time with the wife, because if not, the thing is it quality time? To me, it's always this thing of like, oh, I've been with the kids all day, or I hang out with the kids all the time, or I hang out with my wife all the time, or, I live with my wife. It's like, yeah, but is it quality time? Are you making a conscious effort to actually spend time talking and listening to one another? Or are you just in the same room or the same house? Are you just there? And if we're, and especially when you have kids, it's so easy to get so caught up in all the energy and time that kids are required, that your relationship becomes kind of put in the back burner, and you just forget about it. And I always say, like, relationships are like plants. If you don't water them, they die. You don't just think that you can just leave it there and it's going to stay alive. And to me, it's really important that I keep watering that plant, and keep remembering the reason why I have these beautiful kids that I love so much was because I had a relationship I loved so much that I wanted to take this next step. So to me, like, that, keeping that in the back of my mind, and remembering how important that is, that's like, okay, if I didn't have this relationship, I wouldn't have these kids. So it's like, right, I can't get so caught up in these kids that I forget, like, okay, this is important too. And also it benefits the kids if their parents have a good and healthy and happy relationship, because that makes us better parents. So it's like, it benefits everybody involved. So all these, I mean, these are all little like conversations I have in my head, and little philosophies I have on life that kind of justify, I guess, how I try to live, and the importance of it all. And so yeah, I mean, it is a balancing act. It's a balancing act, because it's like, if I could, it'd be awesome if I could spend 100% of my time with my kids. And then I'm like, I'm neglecting the podcast, or I'm neglecting my wife, or I'm neglecting whatever, and going to the gym, and all these things, I think, like I said, benefit. I have to look at it like they all benefit each other. It's like if I find time to do the podcast and it makes me feel fulfilling, I also feel like I'm contributing to leaving the planet a little better for my kids, a little better than I ever
Right.
did, which is important. If my relationship with my wife is good, that means that she's in a better mood, I'm in a better mood, which means that we're going to be in a better mood when we're dealing with our kids. Our kids are going to see us happy and loving. And of course, like just like every relationship, we have moments where we can't stand each other, and we have moments where we fight and whatever. But I mean, it's all a part of the process. From if I do a podcast at noon, or if I do a podcast at 7 o'clock at night, or 10 in the morning, whenever it may be, my mood's slightly different. I'm slightly more energetic or less energetic based on what I'm dealing with, or what I've done, or whatever. So from 1 hour to another, 1 minute to another, we're slightly different, but we try to do our best to kind of just contribute to positive vibes, and do our best to try to give ourselves the best opportunity to all be in a positive atmosphere. And that also means doing things like that I love, like my podcast, and having these conversations, and I benefit from it because a lot of people will say to somebody like maybe yourself, or myself, somebody who does a podcast, oh, you must, you do it, oh, you're perfect for it because you like talking. And I'm like, I don't, it's a talking thing isn't like, I've been in plenty of conversations where I'm like, I cannot wait till this conversation ends, where I'm just like,
Yeah.
this person just has nothing to offer. They're not even listening to me. They're just waiting for their turn to talk, and they're talking over me, and they're ignoring every point I make, and they're not expanding on anything I'm saying. And so it to me, like, I don't benefit from that. I don't get anything from it. What I do love is conversation. I love bouncing ideas off one another. I love forcing myself to have to explain my perspectives and opinions, because in that process, I'm also reanalyzing what I think, what I feel, who I am, my own personal philosophy. So when people, like yourself, ask me a question and I have to explain it, it might be something that I've thought I had established, and something that I thought I had worked out in my head. And now I'm like, oh, wait, maybe I didn't really think that out that well. Or now after I verbalize it, I realize, like, okay, it's not quite what I thought it was. And so I get a lot of benefit from this. And again, I look at all these things like they're not selfish acts, because they all benefit each other. So taking time away from my full-time job, or my wife, or my kids, to do like a podcast, or go to the gym, or any of these things, it benefits all of us. Because if it puts me in a better mood, if it helps me better understand myself by having these deeper conversations, and then better understand the world around me, then any wisdom I might be able to gather, I can share with my kids, I can share with my wife. We can have these conversations, these thought-provoking conversations, and we all benefit from it. So it's a balancing act. Like you said, it's not always easy. Sometimes it requires just kind of manning up and getting through it. Just before the 4th of July, I felt so fucking burnt out. Like, I just uploaded a show today with James Perloff, and I talked about it in the intro, about how that show, and I have another show with Dr. Carrie Madej that I'm hoping to upload in the next 24 hours. And I was so burnt out when I did those shows. Like, I really didn't feel like I was myself. Like, I was really looking forward to kind of just hitting the reset button and getting away, and that will happen. So, like, sometimes balancing everything out, it just gets to a point where, like, it almost seems impossible, and then you get all stressed out, and you're like, dude, I'm like, it's like the lack of sleep is taking a beating on me, and all this stuff. And I'm so, like, good and disciplined in regards to diet and nutrition and exercise, but even sometimes that doesn't help. If you're sleep, and you have all this stress, and you have all these, like, I was stressing out about getting perfect example. We're talking about this before the show started recording, about how some of the stress we just kind of implement on ourselves. The James Perloff show and the Dr. Carrie Madej show were recorded before the 4th, and I think we left like a day or two before the 4th to New Hampshire. And I told myself, I'm like, I got to get these shows out before we go on vacation, because then it'll be 4 or 5 days before I even get an opportunity to edit them and kind of record the intros and get them out. And I'm like stressing out about it. I'm trying to find time, but I have all this work stuff going on, and then my wife has all these her work stuff going on, and then kid stuff and all these other stresses, and I just didn't find time, and I was like freaking myself out. I'm like, fuck, man, like what? I'm like, I need to get it out. I need to get it out. And then like, I didn't get it out till today, and I'm just like, yeah, well, nobody cares. Like it was like it's 5 days later, like 4 or 5 days later, like, yeah, maybe there's a bigger gap between the last episode and this episode than usual, but nobody's that upset about it, and I was stressing myself out about it. And but that's, and then again, this you can tell how I have these internal I constantly have these internal dilemmas, because it's like, again, I also understand that mindset can be contagious, where just like, okay, who cares? But then I'm like, well, who cares about getting this out in time? Who cares about, oh, I don't have any guests for the next couple of weeks. Who cares? I'll get to it. And then next thing you know, you're procrastinating, and then nothing gets done. So it's like, it's all a balance, and it's not like a fight or a battle internally you have once. It's like, it's every day you're having these battles, and you're trying to find that healthy balance of like, okay, how can I push myself to, it's almost like you're working out, it's like, I want to push myself to the limits where I'm getting a lot done, and I'm getting, I'm going heavy, and I'm doing a lot of reps, but I don't want to overwork out where I'm not, where I'm sore all the time, and I'm hurting myself, and I'm never recovering, and I'm not getting bigger and stronger. So it's like, it is this balancing act where it's like, I want to get a lot done, and I want to put some pressure on myself to get that stuff done, but I don't want to put so much pressure that now, like, I'm not getting anything done, or anything that I am getting done, the quality is hurting, because I'm just so, stressed and physically and mentally just burned out, so yeah, I mean, these are all, that's why that's why podcasts are so important, because even my initial podcast, when it was just me and my friend Dave, these are the type of conversations we would have, and he'd always be like, who the fuck wants to listen to this? Like, we're not, and I'm like, because these are conversations that everybody like has with their friends, and these are personal dilemmas that everybody is dealing with, and trying to figure out. So relatability is huge. That's why I always try to be super honest on the show, and I just try to be myself, and be honest, and be an open book, and people, I think people relate to that. So I don't know what the question was about an hour ago.
No, just about balance. I mean, it's a very complicated issue. It's not an easy 10-word question. I mean, there's an answer. I mean, there's just a lot of different elements that go into it. Kind of tagging on to what we were talking about before the show, is that we stress ourselves out about all this stuff, but in the end, is it really, it's important, but is it important at this very moment? Is there something else that should be a priority? Like, as we're recording this yesterday morning, I woke up super early, like 4 or 5 a.m. I did a little bit of workout here at the house. I'm like, okay, now I can get some of my podcast stuff done, and then I can get to work and all that stuff. And sure enough, like, the kids woke up early. Okay, so it's like, now I'm getting stressed out because the kids are up early. But it's like, no, take care of the kids. They need you. Like, you're their dad. Take care of them. You can do that stuff sometime else. And sure enough, last night they went to bed fine. I was able to get that stuff done. But it's like, at that moment, I was like so stressing myself out about that I was kind of losing focus and attention on what was right in front of me. And that's kind of the fear of having things out of balance, or putting one thing over the other, is that you're sometimes hurting the ones that you love more than you should. So it's definitely a tricky thing, and it's a complicated and complex answer. And we all deal with it in different ways. And I appreciate all your insight about it.
Yeah, and I like to be honest about it, because sometimes people will be like, "How do you get so much done?" Or, "You seem like you have it all together," and I'm like, I don't have it all together. Like, what you just explained, like, that happens to me. There's been times where, like, a Thursday or Friday night, the kids will get to bed. Yeah, they rarely get to bed early. I'm not a big fan of rules, so I'm like, if I'm up, I guess they're up. Why not? Let them. I'll just wait till they're tired. And then sometimes I'll be like, oh, dude, they're out early. I'm like, oh, maybe I can record that intro on my computer while they're sleeping, and like, I'll get everything set up, ready to go, and I'm recording, and then all of a sudden, Dad. I'm like, I'm recording. And I'm like, wait, they don't know I'm recording, and this isn't their fault. And it's like, but in that moment, like you said, you get so mad because you're like, oh, I was gonna get this shit done, and it would have been so perfect, because in my head that means I got the intro done, and that the audio's edited, and tomorrow morning I can upload it. And it's like, we all, and this is like just a picture that's painted on social media, is like the majority of us only share the family or your friends and everybody when they're smiling, when everything is
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
things going well. But the truth is, we all have moments of weaknesses. We all have, I talk about like, oh, I go to the gym, I eat right, I do all these things. I like to have a cigar and hit the reset button and kind of be one of my thoughts. But I'm like, I lose my cool sometimes. I mean, I definitely don't not to the point where like I'm violent or anything like. But I'm saying I get upset where I feel guilty about maybe losing my cool a little too quickly, or handling some, maybe I handled something in a way I think I could have handled better, all that type of stuff. We all have those moments, and no matter how perfect somebody seems online or on a podcast or whatever, like those personal issues you're having, like we're all having, and we're all dealing with. So it's just, I think that's why people like podcasters who are honest and talk
Right.
about their personal lives. I like when people talk about their personal lives. I understand why people don't. I get it. I get why people sometimes just like to stick to the information. I mean, two of my favorite people who actually just did an interview together recently and been on my show a bunch, James Corbett and Whitney Webb. I mean, they're two of my favorite researchers out there. They rarely ever talk about their personal lives. I think one time James was on my show and we were talking about parenting for like the first 45 minutes, and we just got like, or at least I did, I don't know if he got it too, but I remember getting like comment after comment of like, fast forward the first 30 minutes, all they do is talk about dad shit, and I'm just, and it just like, I'm like, yeah, I'm like, he never talks about his personal life. I'm like, it was nice that we kind of got to connect and from that aspect of it, and kind of get to see that different perspective on him. And some people like that. Like I remember when I don't know if you're familiar with Cell Dweller, but he's a electronic music artist. He's really big into music for video games and movies and all this stuff. And he used to be the singer of I think it was Circle of Dust, and really awesome guy. I've been a fan of his forever, and I was very lucky to have him on the show. And we talked, and almost every artist that I've had on my show, a musical artist, I barely ever talk about music. Not in regards to like, oh, what was your thinking when you did this album or that, the typical stuff you hear on most interviews with the artist. I like to get in their personal lives, like who if you're making interesting music, you must be an interesting person, and you must have some other interesting perspectives and philosophies, not just on music but on other aspects of life. And people like that, and
Yeah.
I remember just like so many positive comments on like, oh, you got to check out this interview. I remember seeing it on Twitter being shared all over the place between other Cell Dweller fans about like, oh, he talks about this. He's never talked about this. He's never talked. And that wasn't even on purpose. It was just like, I was just having a conversation with another person that I found interesting. And I just want to kind of talk about things. And it just led down some interesting rabbit holes. And but I think that's what people like. People like seeing the human aspect of people, and
Right.
knowing that like, okay, oh, I've had those thoughts. It's kind of in comedy, and I get it. It's not always the best comedy, but a lot of times, comedy that we like, it's that like elbow hitting comedy where you're at the comedy show, and then the comedian's talking about something and you can relate to it, so you elbow like your wife or your friend, and you're like, oh, that's
Yeah.
up. That's just, it's like we like when we can relate to one another. And so I think it's important to be honest and kind of share those aspects of it. I mean, I know Joe Rogan gets a lot of shit, and I know Scott from Truthzilla calls my show the better Joe Rogan show. But which I really appreciate him saying that. And I've had some people say it's kind of like the Joe Rogan show. I mean, I was influenced by his show, and the same way he has people on from like MMA and nutrition and sports and science and all that stuff. I have a lot of that similar type of interest, so I have a lot of those similar type of guests. And Eddie Bravo's been on my show a lot. I mean, I have a huge list of same guests that have been on his show that's been on my show. But yeah, I mean, people, I think, initially liked the fact how honest he was. I mean, people liked that. It's like, okay, like I've listened to this guy talk like episode after episode, 3 hours after 3 hour episode, and you kind of get a really good feel of who he is, and because how do you talk for that long, and how do you have that many hours of recorded conversation and bullshit people? Eventually who you are is going to come out. So I think that's what really connected a lot of like people like myself who loved the Joe Rogan podcast initially. um a lot of us fell in love with that show because it's like, oh, I feel like I know this person. And you hear podcasters say that, especially like hosts of big shows like Joe Rogan. And I remember hearing Dr. Christopher Ryan talking about it, and his podcast listeners of his show, meeting him. And then he's like, I feel like I'm looking at a stranger, but this person knows everything about me because they've listened to every episode,
Right, right.
So it's this weird connection or lack of connection sometimes, or a one-way connection, right? Like they feel like they're connected to you. You don't really feel like you're connected to them because to you that they're a stranger. But that connection is why we want to support people. I love Corbett. I love Whitney Webb. I love Ryan from Last American Vagabond. I love Sam Tripoli, Charlie Robinson, OBDM. I mean, these are all shows that I've listened to hours and hours and hours of. And because of it, like, I feel like I know who they are and I like who they are. And because I like these people, I'm willing to support these people and talk highly of these people and tell people to go check out their stuff. And so hopefully people get the same thing from my show, that people feel like, it's they get an idea of who I am and what I believe, or maybe just they're on this journey of trying to figure out what I believe, with me. But regardless if you agree or disagree with any of my opinions, at least you know who I am, and I'm not trying to sell you any bullshit, at least not on purpose.
And yeah, that's one thing I really like about your podcast. It's a lot of different diverse people from all different backgrounds, all different occupations and et cetera. And I got speaking, it's what you talked about a little bit ago about talk to people in the music industry. I just saved one of yours into my queue to listen to soon here from in the Wayback Machine. You interviewed the singer of Fear Factory, which that brought me back to like high school days. Me and my brother driving around in his Monte Carlo going to school, and jamming that, going to our Christian school, going in the parking lot and getting lots of sideways looks from everybody. So I'm gonna have to go check that out. But like you brought up, you talk to all these people in the music industry about other things that they're involved with in life. It reminded me of something you had just talked about with that Swapcast with Richard Willett, how you have a friend who is a big basketball player overseas, and then they come back and it's like they don't want to play basketball. Like they want to do other types of activities. So it's almost kind of a cathartic experience for these musicians and stuff too, to kind of put shed that kind of stuff and put it aside and get into other topics and stuff.
Yeah, that's another thing I've thought about too. It's sometimes I have guests on that are known for certain specific topics, and then it's like, well, most of us are going to ask similar questions in regards to that topic or that whatever expertise they're in. And it's nice for them to come on my show. And that's why I remember the first time I had Dennis McKenna on. I think he said some stuff on the air, but then off the air, I mean, I remember him telling me how much he enjoyed the conversation, because it really was just like, it kind of went everywhere and anywhere. And I just had an amazing podcast with Dr. Jessica Rose, and she was suggested to me. And again, this was like before July 4th. So I was like going super crazy with like just dealing with the stress of work and just having a hard time balancing everything out. And I admittedly, I was really struggling, like trying to balance everything out. I just mentally and physically just didn't feel right, and feel like I was doing a good job kind of just figuring out how to find time and energy for everything. And he was getting to me. And so I didn't have time to like look her up. And typically I don't have anybody on. Like if somebody suggests a guest, I'll be like, okay, let me look into them. Let me go. I mean, I get tons of guest suggestions. So I'm like, let me look into them, see, I've had some like legit crazy people contact me. Like they swear that they've worked on UFOs and they have some inside information, or there's some whistleblower for something. And then I see a couple interviews that they've done, and I'm like, this person's full of shit. I'm like, I'm not having this person on. Thank God I didn't bite on that one, and so that happens all the time. So like, and a lot of times too, it's like if I don't find the person interesting, this goes back to like what you're saying in regards to the musician or the my buddy Renato who plays basketball overseas. his whole life is about basketball. So he comes back and he's just like, no, I need a break from basketball. Like, I don't ever want to feel like I need a break from podcasting. So I don't want to just have somebody on just to have them on. I want them to be somebody that I think I can have an interesting, fun conversation with. So even if they're interesting or they're, I find them fascinating and they have, I mean, I've had some past guests where, I'm like, okay, maybe they don't seem the most likable, but I think I could extract, a really fun conversation with them, and they have good information. So I'm hoping, they're not the jerk that I think they're going to be, or they're
Right.
cool than I think they're going to be, they might be. And then I have them on and I'm just like, I'm not sure I'll have them on again. They just, it was really hard to kind of, just connect with them and have that casual fun conversation. So I try to prevent any shows like that if I can. And Dr. Jessica Rose was one of those guests where I'm just like, I got suggested her from Dr. Jack James Lyons Wheeler, who was he's been on my show, he's been on the Union of Unwanted, and he has his own show called Unbreaking Science. And he's really like on the front lines in regards to keeping up with all the science and all that stuff. Really smart guy. And he suggested her, and I'm just like, I'm like, yeah, I'll let you know. And I'm like, oh, let me find some time to look into her before I say yes or no. And I didn't have time. And then I'm like, fuck, man. I'm like, I've been, procrastinating on responding to this email forever. I'm like, you know what? Hey, you know what? I'll have her on. I'm like, well, let's set something up. We'll set something up, and I don't want you to think I'm ignoring you. So I had her on, and then I'm like, I'll just look into her before I have her on, and get some information. I'm sure, we're gonna talk about the coronavirus and COVID and vaccines, all this stuff that I'm pretty knowledgeable with, and I can get her to talk about it, and I'm sure I can kind of expand on whatever she's saying. And then I'm looking her up like a couple days before the show. I found some time. I can't find anything on her. I'm like, where is this person? I'm like, does she exist? Like, who is she? And then I'm getting nervous because I'm like, I don't even have a feel for her personality. Like, I don't even have it's a blind date basically. And only I'm recording it. So if it goes poorly, it's going to be recorded. So and what ends up happening, and what's funny, what makes me think about this is Fear Factory. We end up talking again. I have her on. I know nothing about her besides her. She did some really great work in regards to analyzing some of the VAR system, and she's a really intelligent person in regards to viruses, immune system, like everything medical related and science related. But outside of that, I know nothing else about her other interests. And next thing you know, we're talking about like how much we love Terminator and how much we love heavy metal and Slayer and Fear Factory and whatever, and we're talking about all this music, and I'm just like, this is wild. We end up having like a 3-hour conversation. It was one of those conversations you go away from having the podcast and you're like, fuck, man, that felt like a special conversation. I hope like the people listening have the same type of reaction and have the same type of experience listening as we did having it, because it's like, it's one of those conversations you really connect, you really go down some really interesting rabbit holes, and you get deep into your personal life and philosophies. And it was just a really special conversation. And that's the beautiful thing about these podcasts is you just hit record and you don't know uh and I should say that in regards to like podcasts like yours and mine and a lot of people who do these type of formats where it's just kind of spontaneous, and you can kind of talk about everything and anything, and you don't try to stop the conversation from doing that. You can really get some really special conversations, and you capture them, and to be able to share with the world is just, it's really a privilege and an honor to do that. And but it also shows the power of conversation, the power of how the ability to connect with one another, and how you can get somebody. I mean, she lived in Israel, she's a doctor. I mean, I barely graduated high school, I was in special ed. And so it's like, she's a mathematician, she's a professional surfer, she's she's a musician, like she's a super interesting person. And I'm like, I work construction and I was in special ed, so it's just like, what would we have in common, or what could we talk about, and yet we had this amazing conversation. So it just, that's the beauty of these podcasts. And again, I always understood how different is that than the conversation I have at the bar with my friend. And we have that deep conversation where he ends up sharing some really personal story that he's never shared before, because it's late at night and we've been talking for a while and we've had a couple drinks, and he's more open to talk about something, or something I said brought up this traumatizing experience as a child that he never talked about, whatever. One of those, like, just real deep personal conversations that you're just like, this is fucking awesome. It's not awesome because somebody's just sharing a personal experience, but it's awesome that we can talk about it and we can share it, and we're connecting because of it. And so it's just, yeah, I mean, to be able to capture stuff like that and share with the world, I mean, to me it's super important. I mean, during 2020, every other show was like with Del Bigtree and Dr. Richard Fleming and Dr. Frank Aieta and Dr. Scott Jensen and Mickey Willis. So it's like a lot of shows just on those topics that, were the most relevant in 2020. But I love shows like I had with Dr. Jessica Rose, where just like, it's just a very personal conversation. And some of Joe Rogan's most popular podcasts were shows like that. They were just really personal conversations. I mean, the Fight Companions he did, people loved them. I mean, it was just like a bunch of dudes hanging out, drinking, just bullshitting, and they were just recorded. I mean, I even did a thing called Fight with Friends, and where I would do a similar thing where actually we used to watch this TV behind me in my studio, and we would just watch the UFC, and we would all hang out at a table that I have down here, and we would just hang out and drink, and like about 2 hours in, we're hammered and just bad dick jokes, and we're like giggling. You're with buddies and you're kind of just busting each other's balls, and it was hilarious, and I had a blast doing them. And my friends would always be like, who the fuck's gonna listen to that? The next day they're like, oh, they're like, I can't believe I said that. And I'm like, yeah, don't worry, it's only online forever. And so it was just like, it was just a blast. And I would always send like my friends the download numbers. I'm like, listen, I know this seems like a ridiculous idea, and you're like, who the hell is going to listen to this, and why do we keep doing these shows? But people are listening, people are enjoying them. I'm like, it's just people being, having fun and being silly, and sometimes life needs that. So and also when other people are having fun, a lot of times listening, you have fun, like you feel
Right.
like I'm enjoying it with them. Like if they're giggling and having fun and this like super positive mood, like I feel like I also get in that same mood. Like I'm almost in the room enjoying the silliness with them. So it's wild, man. Podcasting is wild.
And that's the vibe I was getting, talking about that last union if they wanted. I was just driving home from work. I didn't have a great day, but like I turned that on and I just started laughing my ass off. And I didn't even know it was going to go in that direction. But like it has the power to, change somebody's day that you may never, that the host and everything may never even know about. But just it's the power of the medium and being able to touch people's lives in a positive way, in a comedic way, in any given way, information, etc. So it's a really great thing, and I really love all the work you're doing. So I do really appreciate you taking the time to come on and chat today, Ricky. Where can everybody find you and your work, and how can they support what you're doing?
So the Ripple Effect podcast is available on all audio platforms, Spotify, iTunes, Podcast Addict, whatever app you use. You can find it, subscribe to it. It's also on a bunch of video platforms, mostly because, censorship and that type of stuff. So it's on YouTube. Most of them are on YouTube. Some of them have been removed because of, strikes or whatever, but most of them are on YouTube. But if you want to make sure you don't miss anything, or you're looking for a specific episode, they're also on Odyssey, BitChute, Rumble, Float, Rockfin, and then and that's basically it. And then I have in the show description on all my episodes, you'll find links to my Patreon page if you want to support the show. I have a merch store, the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com. I have a PayPal account and stuff like that. But like I always tell people, if you can't financially support the show, then just tell people about the show. Word of mouth. It's a easy way of contributing to kind of, sharing shows that you believe in or you're a fan of, and it helps, So and then the Ripple Effect Podcast.com will lead you to kind of the audio of the show if you just want to get directly to my RSS feed, and you'll have links to everything there. I do have a new website that I'm working on where eventually you'll be able to get the Union of the Unwanted, Ricky Varandas and Rockfin, which is my exclusive show, just on Rockfin, and then Ripple Effect Podcast all on one website. So hopefully looking to launch that very soon, and I'll probably use the rippleeffectpodcast.com URL for that. So keep a lookout for that. But yeah, anywhere you can get podcasts and many other alternatives, you can find it. Because I talk about a lot of things that get censored, like vaccines and big tech and you know, a lot of those issues. It's nice to kind of put the videos everywhere and anywhere. So just about any video platform you're using, you can find it.
Awesome. And everybody, and I'll plug it too, because I really like it. I went back and was listening to some of that music you made from several years ago, and I think that's pretty good stuff too. So you can find that in all your links as well. So go check out everything he's been doing. Ricky, this has been an absolute blast. Thank you for coming on here. So this is Conspiracy Kyle. This was another episode of Conspiracy in the Force. I hope everybody listening wasn't looking for any hardcore Star Wars conversation, because I really wasn't heading in that direction today. So maybe next time. So anyways, may the Force be with you, and thanks for listening.